The morning light spilled through the kitchen window, soft and golden, bouncing off the copper kettle on the stove. Keaton sat at the table, swinging his legs, tapping his spoon against his cereal bowl in an offbeat rhythm. I set a plate of scrambled eggs down in front of him. "Eggs too?" he asked, pretending to look overwhelmed. "Protein builds champions," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "You can't win the school fun run on sugar alone." He grinned, cheeks puffed from the mouthful of cereal. "I thought you said it's just for fun." "It is. But you still want to cross the finish line without collapsing into the grass." I took a sip from my mug, savoring the warmth. Outside, Spokane was in full autumn mode. Maple leaves littered the sidewalks, a few early pumpkins sat on porches, and neighbors were out chatting over fences as if the cool morning air was too good to waste indoors. Living here meant people noticed everything. I'd learned the truth behind the old saying, in small towns, everyone knows your story, or at least they think they do. Keaton finished his cereal and leaned back. "Can I walk to school today?" "Sure," I said, ruffling his hair. "But I'm walking with you." We stepped outside, the air crisp enough to see our breath. The crunch of leaves underfoot mixed with the faint sound of someone mowing a lawn 2 streets over. I waved at Mrs. Keller, who was busy pruning her rose bushes, and she waved back with that warm, habitual smile. As we reached the school gates, Keaton turned and waved before running to join his friends. I stood for a moment, watching him disappear into the crowd of kids, before heading home. By the time I reached the porch, my ankle reminded me of why I'd been hesitant to walk far these past few weeks. I'd twisted it stepping off the curb outside the grocery store, and while it wasn't serious, the ache lingered. That evening, after making sure Keaton was settled with his homework, I sat with an ice pack, staring at the week's calendar. The appointments, errands, and that checkup with my doctor crowded the squares. I hated asking for help. Pride is a tricky thing. It makes you believe you can juggle more than you should. But practicality whispered that I couldn't manage everything on my own right now. So I picked up the phone and called my mother. "So Len, sweetheart?" Drusilla answered on the second ring, her tone sugary and smooth. "What a lovely surprise." I explained about the ankle, the upcoming doctor's appointment, and how it would help if she and Dad could watch Keaton for a few days. "Oh, of course," she said without hesitation. "We'd be delighted. You just focus on getting better. He'll have so much fun with us and the cousins." Her enthusiasm was almost too perfect, each word wrapped in bright paper and tied with a bow. I felt a faint prickle under my skin but brushed it off. "Thanks, Mom," I said, meaning it, even if part of me wondered why she sounded like she was reading from a script. After we hung up, I packed Keaton's overnight bag. He insisted on adding his favorite toy car, tucking it into the side pocket like it was a good luck charm. The next afternoon, we drove to my parents' house. Drusilla met us at the door, her arms wide, her smile bigger than I'd seen in months. "There's my favorite grandson," she said, sweeping Keaton into a hug. Harlan stood behind her, nodding in my direction, quiet as always. Inside, I noticed the living room was scattered with toys, not Keaton's, but the kind Taryn's kids played with. It was subtle, but the message was there. "Don't worry, Solen," Drusilla said, patting my arm. "We'll take the best care of him." Keaton was already halfway to the den, eager to see his cousins. I felt relief wash over me, though a small knot of unease remained in my chest. As I stepped back onto the porch, a neighbor approached, Isabel Rowe, carrying a grocery bag in one hand. "Well, look at you," she said to Drusilla. "Got the whole crew under your wing this week?" "Oh yes," Drusilla replied loudly enough for the street to hear. "We just love having Keaton around. He's such a joy." Her tone had shifted. It was brighter, performative, almost theatrical. I'd heard it before, reserved for moments when she wanted to paint the perfect picture. Isabel smiled at me. "It's nice to see family so close." I returned the smile, but inside, her words stung. I knew how complicated that closeness could be. As I walked to my car, I remembered an old saying from my grandmother. "Family should be your safest place, until it's not." Keaton stood on the porch, waving as I pulled out of the driveway. From a distance, it was a warm image, one that could make anyone believe everything was fine. Driving home, I replayed the day's events. There had been moments, small, almost invisible, that hinted at something I couldn't quite name. I thought of the times Drusilla had gently but firmly steered decisions in ways that suited her. She'd always done it with a smile, as though her control was simply care in disguise. I've learned, I murmured to myself. When someone's kindness feels like a performance, it usually is. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Mom. Could you send over Keaton's insurance card? Just in case. The request was reasonable enough, but it was the timing, barely an hour after I left, that made me pause. Still, I sent her a photo of the card and told myself not to overthink it. That evening, I tried to rest. I stretched out on the couch, a book in hand, but my eyes kept darting to the silent phone on the coffee table. I checked the time more than once, each minute dragging. I told myself nothing was wrong. But I didn't know it then, didn't even feel the shift under my feet. That night would be the last time I felt truly safe about leaving my son with them. The next day, I sat at my desk with my laptop open, pretending to focus on the spreadsheet in front of me. Numbers scrolled past my eyes, but they didn't stick. My thoughts kept circling back to Keaton. Whether he'd slept well, if he'd eaten breakfast, whether his cousins were being kind to him. I finally gave in and picked up my phone, typing out a quick text to Mom. "How's his day going?" Her reply came a few minutes later. "Fine. Busy here." That was it. No detail, no anecdote, no comment about something cute he'd said or done. Drusilla usually sent long, winding updates about Keaton, what he'd eaten, the games he'd played, even how many pages of a book he'd finished. This short, clipped message didn't fit her pattern. I stared at the phone, an uneasy knot forming in my stomach. Sometimes, silence says more than words ever could, my grandmother used to tell me. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself they were probably just distracted. But the small knot stayed. The afternoon slipped into early evening, the light outside turning soft and gold. I was halfway through answering emails when the phone rang. Mom's name lit up the screen. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Oh, hi, Solène," she answered, her voice pitched just a touch higher than usual. "Listen, could you do me a favor? I need a few papers from your file cabinet." "What kind of papers?" "Oh, just some household admin stuff, nothing major," she replied with a light laugh. I frowned. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Oh, you know, insurance, maybe a couple of utility statements. It's easier if I just stop by and grab them." Her casual tone only made my pulse quicken. In that cabinet, right next to the insurance folder, were my property deed and mortgage documents. "I can bring them over tomorrow," I offered. "No trouble." "Oh, no, dear. I'll be in the neighborhood later. I can just swing by." There was a pause, the kind where you measure your words before you speak. "In my world," I finally said, "when someone insists on doing you a favor that's already in your control, that's a red flag." She chuckled, brushing it off. "You always overthink things, honey." We ended the call, but my mind was turning over every word. Later, I took the trash out, the cool breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from somewhere down the block. Isabette Rowe was unloading grocery bags from her car across the street. "Evening, Solène," she called. "Hi, Isabette," I replied, setting the trash bin by the curb. She hesitated, then tilted her head. "Haven't seen your boy around. He doing okay?" "Oh, he's fine. He's with my parents for a few days," I said, expecting that to end the conversation. Instead, she frowned slightly. "That's odd. I saw your mom at the store earlier, with Taryn's kids. No Keaton, though." I kept my smile fixed, even as my mind started cataloging the inconsistency. "Maybe he stayed home," I said lightly. "You know how kids are." "Sure," she said, though her tone held a question she didn't voice. We exchanged a few pleasantries before she headed inside. I stood there for a moment longer, the weight of her comment settling in. Back inside, I leaned against the kitchen counter, replaying Isabette's words. The image of my mother pushing a cart with Taryn's kids, but not Keaton, lodged itself in my mind. I compared it to her vague text earlier, to her request for my documents. "Trust is built in drops and lost in buckets," I murmured to myself. I'd learned that lesson the hard way before. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but I also started mentally logging each small, odd detail. By dinner, the house felt emptier than usual. Cooking for one had never been my favorite, but that night the act of setting the table for a single person felt heavier. I placed my plate down, the empty seat across from me a reminder of how often Keaton filled the space with chatter. I ate in silence, glancing at my phone every few minutes, hoping for a call. It never came. After cleaning up, I sat on the couch, the quiet pressing in. It's not the absence of noise that unsettles you, it's the absence of what should be there, I thought. Before bed, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Keaton at the park, Keaton holding up a lopsided pancake he'd made, Keaton curled up with his favorite book. I set the phone down, the ache in my chest sharp and insistent. I decided I wasn't going to wait until the end of the week to see him. I'd go over tomorrow, unannounced, just to check in. I thought I was going to ease my mind. Instead, I was walking straight into the truth I didn't want to know. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I rolled over, I pictured Keaton's face and that hollow quiet in my house. By 5:30 a.m., I was sitting up in bed, staring at the gray morning light slipping past the curtains. I told myself I was just going to stop by my parents' house to say hi, to reassure myself he was fine, but deep down, I knew this was about more than that. In the kitchen, I poured coffee and stood by the counter, running through possible scripts in my head, friendly, casual reasons for showing up unannounced. I was in the neighborhood. I thought I'd bring muffins. All of them sounded weak, even to me. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, shrugged into a coat, and slipped my phone into my pocket. As I locked the front door, I thought about all the times in my life I'd ignored warning signs because confronting them meant conflict. I'd told myself keeping the peace was the noble thing, but peace built on silence always came with a price. Once is a mistake. Twice is a pattern. By the time I was driving across town, the trees lining the streets were throwing gold and amber shadows across my windshield. My hand stayed tight on the wheel the whole way. When I pulled up to my parents' place, the first thing I noticed was how still it was. No bikes on the lawn, no cars in the driveway. Usually, I could hear the distant sound of cartoons or kids arguing over toys before I even rang the bell. This time, nothing. I knocked, waited, knocked again. Still no answer. I walked around to the side of the house, figuring they might be in the backyard. That's when I saw her, Corinne Ashford, a CPS worker I'd met briefly years ago when I volunteered for a school event. She stepped out of the side door, holding a folder. "Solène," she said, surprised but not unpleasantly. "I'm sorry you couldn't keep him." The words hit me so hard I thought I'd misheard. "What?" My voice cracked on the single syllable. She hesitated. "Keaton, he's with a foster family now. I thought you knew." I stared at her. "No, I didn't know. How? When?" Her brow furrowed. "It was a few days ago. We were told you were aware. Your mother signed the release." The ground felt like it tilted under me. I managed to say, "Can you explain why?" "Paperwork says parent unable to provide care." I didn't respond right away because I knew if I did, the words would be sharp enough to cut. Deliberate. Planned. Not an emergency. Corinne glanced toward the street. "I can give you the procedural contact info, but I can't tell you the foster family's name or address without a formal request." I nodded mechanically, took the paper from her, and walked back to my car. Sitting behind the wheel, I gripped it so tightly my knuckles burned. I drove straight to the CPS office and filed the request. Within an hour, they arranged a supervised visit for later that morning. The meeting room looked exactly like what you'd expect from a state office. Off-white walls, metal chairs, a table scarred from years of use. Child-safe posters of cartoon animals covered one wall in a half-hearted attempt to make it welcoming. The door opened and Keaton stepped in, small shoulders hunched, clutching his toy car. "Hey, buddy," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. He sat across from me, eyes darting to the social worker in the corner before settling on the table. After a moment, he said, "Grandma said you didn't want me anymore." My breath caught, but I kept my face calm. "That's not true," I said firmly. "I will always want you. You're my son, and nothing changes that." He nodded slowly, but his fingers kept rubbing the toy car like it was the only solid thing in the room. Inside, the truth slammed into me. She'd told him that to make him believe I'd let him go. We spent the rest of the visit talking about small things, his favorite book, what he'd eaten, how school was going. I didn't push. I just let him know I was there, that I wasn't going anywhere. I noticed how he didn't meet my eyes as much as before, how his answers were shorter. He stayed close to the edge of the table, never leaning in. As we stood to leave, I said quietly, "They took you from me once. They won't do it again." He hugged me briefly, then stepped back toward the door. I kept my composure until I was back in my car. I sat there for a long time, replaying his words. "Grandma said you didn't want me anymore," over and over, each time feeling the cut a little deeper. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a moment that could be fixed with a calm conversation. It was an intentional act to erase me from my own child's life. If they thought I'd let this slide, they'd forgotten who raised me, and what I learned watching them. I drove without a real destination, the hum of the engine and the soft rattle of loose change in the console my only company. Keaton's words from the CPS meeting looped in my mind, each replay sharpening their edge. "Grandma said you didn't want me anymore." A part of me wanted to turn the car toward my parents' house and throw every accusation I had right in their faces. Another part reminded me that if I went in angry, I'd leave empty-handed. I'd learned long ago that to deal with my family, I had to be strategic. I stopped at a cafe on the corner of Division and Main, slid into a booth, and ordered a coffee I barely touched. My phone lay on the table, screen dark, until I tapped it to check for messages. Nothing from Drusilla. No photos of Keaton. No explanation. I stared out the window, watching a couple in jackets walk by, laughing over something one of them said. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, but information is the seasoning," an old colleague used to tell me when I handled workplace disputes. Right now, I needed both. If they thought they could rewrite the story without me noticing, they were underestimating just how well I'd learned their patterns. I pulled my phone closer and opened Instagram, just to see if they'd slipped up. Scrolling past vacation selfies from acquaintances and blurry dinner plates, I almost missed it. Then Taryn's smiling face filled my screen. Sun hat, tropical drink in hand, the caption reading, "Family vacation before school starts." Behind her, in matching Family First t-shirts, stood my mother and father. Taryn's 3 kids crowded in front, each holding a leash of bright flowers. Everyone was smiling, everyone except Keaton, because he wasn't there. I stared at the photo, reading the caption again and again, no mention of him, not even a hint. My mind supplied its own bitter commentary. Family first, as long as it's the family they chose. I took a screenshot, then another that included the comments below, dozens of heart emojis and "so happy for you guys" from friends who had no idea what they were looking at. The image went straight into my evidence folder. By late afternoon, I stopped by my mailbox on the way home. Flipping through the envelopes, I paused at a glossy postcard, an idyllic Hawaiian beach scene, palm trees arching over turquoise water. The addressee wasn't me, it was my neighbor, Isabet. But the card had been left in my box, the kind of accident that wasn't one. I turned it over. In my mother's looping handwriting, "Wish you were here," followed by a smiley face. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was intentional. This was theater, and I was the target audience. When I walked inside, I set my bag down just as the doorbell rang. Isabet stood there holding the postcard, shifting it between her hands. "Hi, Solène. I think this was put in your box by mistake," she said, though her tone suggested she doubted it was a mistake at all. I took it from her, forcing a polite smile. "Thanks. I'm sure it just got mixed in." She hesitated. "I didn't know your family was in Hawaii. That must be nice." "They didn't invite me," I said evenly. My voice stayed calm, but my eyes betrayed more than I wanted. Her brows knit together. "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's fine, Isabet." I softened my tone. "Really?" She gave a tight nod, clearly torn between curiosity and the instinct to stay out of it. "Okay. Well, see you around." When the door closed, I stood in the hallway for a long moment, the card still in my hand. Small towns like ours didn't need formal networks to pass along information. One curious glance, one misunderstood remark, and you had a ripple that reached everyone. In the kitchen, I spread the photo printout from Taryn's post beside the postcard. Next to them, I placed a growing pile of notes and screenshots, each one a breadcrumb leading to a larger truth. I imagined what I'd say to Drusilla if I confronted her now. I rehearsed the words in my head, making sure they were sharp enough to land, but not so sharp they'd cut short the conversation I needed to have. Some of what I wanted to say would have to wait. Timing mattered. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake, Napoleon once said. My mother might not have been a general, but she was waging a quiet war, and I intended to let her keep walking into her own traps. I gathered everything into a neat stack, bound it with a paperclip, and slid it into my bag. The cold coffee from the cafe still sat on the counter. I took a sip now, the bitterness suiting my mood. The phone buzzed in my hand, an unknown number. I opened the text. Hope you're enjoying the peace and quiet. And I stared at it, my pulse slowing instead of quickening. They thought this was control. They thought this was victory. They thought they were in control, I murmured, setting the phone down beside the stack of evidence. I was about to remind them they'd taught me every trick they know. I woke before the sun, the room still in that cold, gray half-light that makes everything feel unsettled. Sleep had been useless. Every time I closed my eyes, the postcard, the photo, and Keaton's voice collided in my mind. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, and made a decision. Today wouldn't be about speculation. It would be about proof. In my family, truth is something you have to dig for. It's never handed to you. I'd spent my entire life watching information be managed, edited, and spun until it no longer resembled reality. If I wanted the truth about my house, about what they were doing, I had to pull it out piece by piece. I made coffee, sat at the table with a yellow legal pad, and wrote out the plan. First stop, Spokane County Recorder's Office. Then, if the hunch I'd been carrying since last night proved right, I'd track down whoever thought they owned my home now. I slid a blank folder into my bag, the kind with stiff pockets that could keep papers crisp, and grabbed a pen. If there was one thing Drusilla respected, it was documented fact. Too bad she was about to see it work against her. The recorder's office was quiet, the low murmur of a radio behind the counter the only sound when I walked in. A young clerk looked up, offering a professional but distracted smile. Morning, I said, placing my driver's license on the counter. I need property records for my address. Full history, please. Her fingers moved over the keyboard, but she hesitated before printing anything. Do you own the property? Yes. My answer was flat, clipped. She pressed her lips together, eyes flicking toward the printer. Well, according to the system, the property was sold last month. My heart thudded once, hard, but I kept my voice level. Could you print the documents for me? The printer hummed, spitting out pages. When she handed them over, the first thing I saw was my own name on the seller's line, except it wasn't my signature. It was a clumsy imitation, the letters uneven, the tail on the N wrong. Whoever had forged it hadn't even gotten the date right. It matched the week I'd been hobbling around with my ankle wrapped, barely able to leave the house. I forced a small nod. Could you certify these copies for me? Of course. She disappeared into the back for a minute and returned with the documents stamped and signed. Walking back to my car, I slid the folder into my bag with deliberate care. The shock was there, yes, but beneath it was something colder. Validation. They'd crossed a line I couldn't pretend was an accident. The buyer's name was listed as Fenwick Droll, an address on the north side of town. I didn't wait. The house was tidy, white shutters, and a neat lawn. I parked across the street, walked up the driveway, and rang the bell. A man in his late 50s opened the door, friendly but cautious. Can I help you? Mr. Droll, I'm Solène Brandt. I think you recently bought a house from my family. I just have a few questions. He blinked. Your family? Well, your parents, yes. They said you'd moved abroad. Something about starting fresh overseas. I kept my face neutral. Did they now? He nodded. I was told the paperwork was in order, paid through their account. I thought everything was legitimate. I smiled faintly, the kind you use when you want someone to keep talking. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just needed to confirm the story I was given. Well, he said, leaning on the doorframe, I hope you get things sorted. I'm sorry if there's trouble. No need to apologize. You've been helpful. I shook his hand, leaving with a polite goodbye. In the car, I pulled out my phone and played back the audio I'd recorded during our conversation. His voice, clear as day, stating that my parents claimed I'd moved abroad, another piece of the puzzle in place. I sat there for a long minute, the weight of the entire pattern settling over me. This wasn't about a bad week or a misunderstanding. This was an orchestrated plan. Ankle injury, Keaton sent to them, for help, house sold behind my back, the narrative neatly rewritten to erase me. Some betrayals are loud, others whisper until they've taken everything. They weren't just trying to hurt me, they were trying to dismantle my independence entirely. By the time I got home, the sky was darkening. I spread the certified sale documents, the audio transcript, and every other scrap of evidence I'd collected onto the dining table. Chronological order, start to finish, so I could see the whole arc. I thought about the next moves. Legal action was obvious. Personal confrontation would come too, but it had to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right witnesses. I grabbed another sheet of paper and started a contact list. Lawyer, CPS ally, neighbors who'd seen or heard things. If I was going to win this, I needed every angle covered. My gaze drifted back to the forged signature. The loops were wrong, the slant unnatural. I stared at it until the cold anger steadied into resolve. The phone buzzed, pulling me back. A text from Drusilla. We need to talk. Come by tonight. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Perfect, I murmured to the empty room. They have no idea I'm walking in armed. By the end of tonight, they'd realize they'd sold more than my house. They'd sold the last chance I'd ever give them. I parked on the street, deliberately bypassing the driveway. It was petty, maybe, but I wanted them to see the distance before I even stepped through their door. My bag was heavier than usual, not because of the weight of paper, but because of what it represented. Certified sale documents, the buyer's recorded statement, proof they had crossed a line they couldn't erase. The house glowed from the inside, warm yellow light spilling through the curtains. From the outside, it could have been any pleasant evening. Inside, I knew, the air would be thick with calculation. I steadied my breathing before walking up the path. Anger on the outside is a gift to them. Anger on the inside is a weapon for me. When I knocked, I made sure the sound was firm, not frantic. The door opened to Drusilla's smile, a smile that stopped short of her eyes. Solène, she said brightly, as if we'd run into each other at the grocery store. Harlan stood a few feet back, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the carpet. Inside, Taryn and Breck sat on the couch, too posed for it to be casual. We just want to clear the air, Drusilla began. I'm not here to clear the air, I said, stepping inside without waiting for her to invite me. I'm here to deal in facts. The room went still. I could feel the shift, the subtle tightening of shoulders. I set my bag on the coffee table, unzipped it, and pulled out the first document. The property sale paperwork lay between us, my forged signature glaring up from the page. What's this supposed to be? Drusilla asked, her tone still playing at ignorance. Your mistake, I replied, sliding it toward her. Certified copies from the recorder's office. Taryn leaned forward, arms crossed. You always overreact to everything. I reached in again, placing my phone on the table and tapping the screen to play the audio. Fenwick Droll's voice filled the room. Your parents told me you were moving abroad for good. Drusilla's smile cracked. You're out, she snapped suddenly, voice sharp enough to cut the air. I let the words hang there. The final, public eviction from the family, delivered in front of every co-conspirator in the room. I memorized the way it sounded, knowing I'd carry it with me like a marker on a map. This was the point of no return. And there it is, I said evenly. The truth, stripped of decoration. For a moment, the silence was so tight it hummed. Then I spoke again. Do you want to know how far this has gone? Let me tell you about the bank. A few days earlier, I'd gone to verify the account tied to the property sale. At the counter, pen in hand, I'd looked up to see Harlan in line. He'd looked straight through me, told the teller he didn't know me. The teller's confusion was obvious, glancing between us like she was missing a joke. Now, I leaned back and said, "He pretended not to know me in public, in a bank. That's not just distance, it's erasure." Harlan shifted in his seat, but didn't speak. The combination of her "you're out" and his public denial painted the picture for me. They weren't just pushing me away, they were trying to rewrite my existence. I stood, sliding the papers back into my bag. "I'm leaving with my evidence intact. I have no intention of discussing any of this again without my lawyer present." The word lawyer landed exactly where I wanted it to. Drusilla's eyes flickered, just for a moment. "This," I said, shouldering the bag, "is the last time I step into this house unannounced. Next time, it'll be in court." I walked to the door without looking back. The satisfaction wasn't in the volume of my voice or the heat of the moment. It was in keeping my composure when every part of them wanted me to break. Outside, the air was cooler, a relief against my skin. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the evening slide off my shoulders just enough to keep walking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. "You think you've won? But this isn't over." "Good," I murmured, slipping the phone away. I was hoping they'd fight back. I'm better when I'm cornered. The next morning, I tried to give myself a normal start, coffee in hand, sitting at the kitchen table, my folder of evidence spread out before me. I thought I'd use the quiet to organize timelines and check my notes. The knock on the door cut through that illusion like a blade. When I opened it, Corinne Ashford stood there, CPS badge clipped to her jacket, holding a manila envelope. "Solen, we need to talk," she said. The words were neutral, but her eyes carried the weight of bad news. We sat in the living room, and she set the envelope on the coffee table between us. "A new report was filed," she began, "alleging that you're emotionally unstable and neglectful." Her tone was careful, as if gauging my reaction. "The recommendation is to maintain Keaton's foster placement for the time being." I didn't have to ask who filed it. "Drusilla," I said flatly, "and Taryn." Corinne didn't confirm, but she didn't deny it either. When they can't win the truth, I thought aloud, they weaponize the lies. She explained the contents, claims twisted from normal parenting moments, making boundaries sound like control, making concerns sound like instability. I kept my expression steady, but inside, the fury was tightening, solidifying. Corinne finally said, "I wanted you to hear it from me before you got the notice in the mail." "Appreciated," I replied. "Now give me a copy." She slid the report toward me. "You'll need to contact the case manager to dispute it, and, Solen, there's also a restriction. You can't see Keaton for 30 days while this is investigated." 30 days, a calculated number, long enough to weaken the connection, long enough for Drusilla to drip her poison without interference. I signed for the copy, thanked Corinne, and walked her to the door. My voice stayed calm, my resolve sharper than ever. That afternoon, the phone rang. Drusilla's number. "Hello?" I said, my tone cool. Her voice was syrupy. "We gave you a life free of responsibility for a while. You should thank us." It was the kind of sentence designed to hit a bruise and press. "Is that what you call it?" I asked evenly. "Selling my home, keeping my son away, filing false reports." "Oh, you're being dramatic, Solen. We're thinking of Keaton's best interests." "Then explain," I pressed, "how cutting his mother out of his life serves him." There was a pause, just long enough to be an answer. "You know, sometimes people can't see the help they're given until it's gone," she said, a faint edge creeping into her tone. I smiled without warmth. "And sometimes people think manipulation is help. I know the difference." When we hung up, I immediately called my attorney. I forwarded her the new CPS report and every related document. Then I called Lyora. "They're escalating," I told her. "We're moving into full documentation mode." Every conversation, every piece of paper, logged. "They tried to bury us," Lyora quoted, "but they didn't know we were seeds." That line stuck with me as I made my plan for the week ahead. I listed potential witnesses, people who'd seen Keaton with me, seen me care for him. I mapped out the timeline from my injury to the present, each move they'd made, each counter-move I'd taken. By late afternoon, I was done reacting. I was acting. I called a locksmith, had every lock on the house changed before dark. I updated passwords on my accounts, enabled two-factor authentication on my phone. Next, I sent a group message to the handful of people I trusted. Don't share any personal info with anyone from my family, not even small talk. As the locksmith packed up, I stood in my living room, eyes on the framed photo of Keaton and me at the lake last summer. His grin, wide and unguarded, reminded me why I couldn't back down. "I'm bringing you home," I whispered to the glass. "Whatever it takes." I sat at my laptop that night, sorting through digital files, when a new email appeared in my inbox. Subject: "You think you know the whole story." No sender name I recognized. No body text, just a single attachment labeled, "Watch this." My pulse slowed, not sped up. If this was their next move, I was ready to press play. 3 days after that anonymous email landed in my inbox, I finally opened the attachment. I'd run it through every scan I knew, sent it to a friend in IT to double-check. No malware, no traps, just a single video file. I clicked play. The screen filled with the image of a CPS parking lot. The camera was positioned from across the street, shaky but clear enough. Drusilla and Taryn were there, standing by a CPS vehicle. Keaton was with them, his small backpack slung over his shoulders. They were smiling, laughing. Taryn adjusted his collar while Drusilla handed a thick folder to a caseworker. Even from the grainy angle, I recognized the folder. Cream-colored, with a green elastic band. The same kind I'd seen on the CPS desk the day I first asked about the false report. They put Keaton in the car, shut the door, and then, God help me, they high-fived. I paused the video, my jaw tight, and stared at the frozen frame. Anger burned hot, but there was something else underneath, satisfaction. This was proof, undeniable, visual proof. "They wanted me to watch," I murmured. "Fine, but they forgot. I know how to use a stage." I copied the file to 3 separate drives, one for my lawyer, one for Leora, and one locked in my own safe. They couldn't bury this, not now. By the next morning, Leora had the bank subpoenas ready. Within 2 days, we had the statements in hand. I spread them across her desk, my eyes scanning the columns of transactions. Thousands of dollars drained in the weeks after my house was sold. Resort charges from Hawaii, spa services, luxury boutiques, all while Keaton was sleeping in a stranger's home under state supervision. The gut punch hit harder than I expected. Seeing my money converted into Mai Tais and monogrammed luggage made it impossible to pretend any of this was about family needs. We paired the statements with Taryn's public posts, her flashing a designer bag that matched a purchase on the account. Drusilla tagged at a resort dinner the same night my bank showed a bill for $680. I printed every screenshot, every receipt, and clipped them neatly. "This isn't going to court in a folder," I told Leora. "It's going to the court of public opinion first." We picked the perfect venue, the monthly community meeting at the local center. Drusilla was a fixture there, always front row, always offering to organize bake sales and coat drives. Her reputation in that room was gold, and I was about to strip the plating off. I loaded a USB drive with the video, the bank statements, and the screenshots. I rehearsed my delivery until the words felt like muscle memory. When the night came, the parking lot was already full. I slipped into the back of the hall while Drusilla worked the crowd, hugging neighbors, cooing over their grandchildren. She was in her element, the doting grandmother, all soft smiles and warm tones. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, I thought, watching her charm another couple. When the moderator called for community concerns, I walked to the microphone. "I have something relevant to family safety and integrity," I began, my voice steady. The room quieted. "It concerns actions taken by individuals in this very community." I clicked the remote. The projector lit up with the paused video frame, Drusilla and Taryn by the CPS vehicle. Gasps rippled through the rows. I pressed play. They watched as Keaton was loaded into the car, as the folder changed hands, as the high five landed. I didn't rush it. When the video ended, I brought up the bank statements and matched them, line by line, to the photos from Taryn's social media. All while my son was in foster care, I said into the microphone. They were spending the proceeds from my stolen home on vacations and luxuries. The murmurs swelled. Drusilla's face was tight now, her smile gone, her eyes darting toward the exit. She didn't speak. This, I finished, is what family looks like when love is conditional. The meeting ended faster than usual. Drusilla slipped out without looking at anyone. Taryn left in a storm of perfume and slammed doors. Outside, a few community members approached me quietly. "If you need a statement, I'll give one," one man said. "I saw things," another whispered. "They handed me numbers, names, witnesses. Liora met me by my car." "You made a bigger impact than you think," she said. "Half that room had their phones out. That video is going to circulate." Relief washed over me, but it came tangled with the edge of adrenaline. This was a win, but only a battle, not the war. At home, I kicked off my shoes and was about to pour tea when the phone rang. My lawyer's voice was calm but telling. "They've requested mediation before the court date." I leaned back in my chair, the corner of my mouth lifting. If they want to talk, it's only because they've realized they're cornered. And in my head, I finished the thought. I had no intention of giving them a way out without a scar. 3 days after the community meeting, I sat in Liora's office with my evidence spread out across her desk. Certified documents, screenshots, bank statements, and that video. They were all there, organized and tabbed. Liora leaned back in her chair, reading through a list she'd typed out. "Remember," she said, "mediation isn't about truth. It's about leverage. And sometimes it's used to corner people into giving up more than they should. The first agreement you make in mediation," she added with a faint smirk, "is to protect yourself." I nodded, letting her words settle. Every time I'd trusted my family to act in good faith, they'd twisted it into a weapon. I wasn't walking into this room as their daughter. I was walking in as the person they'd underestimated. Outwardly, I felt calm. Inwardly, I was on high alert. I kept replaying every manipulation Drusilla had ever pulled, how she'd start soft, speaking in reasonable tones, before slipping the knife in with a phrase that made you question your own memory. By the time we walked into the downtown legal center, my resolve was set. The conference room was sterile, white walls, a long table lined with legal pads, pitchers of water, and little bowls of mints. The mediator, a man in a navy suit with an unreadable face, sat at the head. On the far side of the table, Drusilla, Harlan, Taryn, and Breck were already in place. Drusilla offered the first smile, warm enough to melt wax but not to touch me. "We all want what's best for Keaton," she said, her voice just loud enough for the mediator to hear. In my head, I dissected it. Strategic misdirection, painting herself as the reasonable one before we'd even begun. The mediator cleared his throat. "We're here to explore possible resolutions. Each party will have a chance to speak without interruption." He gestured for Liora to start. She didn't. Not right away. Instead, she slid a small flash drive across the table to the mediator. "This contains supplementary evidence," she said. "It includes a video relevant to custody considerations and a legal brief citing procedural violations by CPS in this case." Drusilla's hands twitched as the mediator plugged the drive into his laptop. The video played silently, but even without sound, the images were enough. Drusilla and Taryn putting Keaton into the CPS vehicle, handing over the folder, the high five. The mediator paused to read the notes Liora had included. I watched Drusilla's posture change, a subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes flicked to Taryn, who shifted uncomfortably in her chair. That was the moment they realized their ground had shifted. Liora didn't look at me, but I could feel her timing. The pressure was on them now. Halfway through, I pulled out another set of papers, certified property sale documents. I laid them flat. "This," I said, "is my house. It was sold without my consent under false pretenses." Drusilla's voice was sharp. "It was a family necessity. You weren't able to—" "Fenwick Droll's signed statement says otherwise," I interrupted, sliding the notarized affidavit forward. The mediator read it carefully. "The implications of fraudulent property transfer are serious," he said, glancing at Drusilla, then Harlan. Harlan shifted in his seat, looking everywhere but at me. Drusilla's fingers tapped the table, fast and restless. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. Strategic silence works like a mirror. It makes people look at themselves, and often they don't like what they see. Taryn cracked first. "Well, maybe Mom didn't explain every detail," she said, a defensive edge to her voice. That contradiction landed exactly where I wanted it. The mediator noted something on his pad. He called for a recess. Outside in the hall, Leora spoke low. "You've got them against the wall. Decide now what you want in writing." "Legal custody of Keaton," I said, "and restitution for the house." Back in the room, the air felt heavier. The mediator's tone was measured as he summarized. "Given the presented evidence, my recommendation to the court will reflect significant consideration of Ms. Brandt's claims." Drusilla didn't look at me when we stood to leave, but the glare she shot in my direction carried both anger and something else, recognition of defeat, at least for now. The fight wasn't over, but they finally knew I wasn't the one cornered anymore. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with intention. A deep navy suit, tailored enough to convey authority but not arrogance, a cream blouse, and my hair pulled back so my face was unobstructed. No armor is more effective than looking like you have nothing to hide. Outside the courthouse, Leora was waiting, her coat collar turned up against the cold. She handed me a slim leather portfolio. "Remember," she said, "this isn't about winning every point. It's about showing the judge which version of events makes sense." Inside, the building was all polished floors and echoing footsteps. Conversations in hushed tones drifted from the hallways. The metallic clang of a closing file cabinet punctuated the air. We entered the courtroom to see them already seated, Drusilla, Harlan, Taryn, and Breck, flanked by their attorney. The energy was different from mediation. Their postures were stiffer, their eyes avoiding mine. This is not about anger anymore. It's about proving the truth. When the judge took the bench, Leora rose smoothly, introducing our exhibits. First came the video from the community meeting. Drusilla and Taryn loading Keaton into the CPS vehicle, folder in hand, exchanging that careless high five. The judge's brow furrowed before it was even halfway through. Then came the bank records, line by line, tying the stolen proceeds from my house to the Hawaii resort, the boutiques, the spa charges. Leora's delivery was calm, surgical. Opposing counsel leaned toward Drusilla, whispering rapidly. Drusilla's eyes stayed locked on the table. The shift in the room was tangible. For once, they weren't steering the story. Leora pivoted to the emotional undercurrent, holding up a photo of Keaton's memory box. She asked me to explain it. It held his school drawings, awards, small keepsakes from milestones, I told the judge. It was in my house before the unauthorized sale. Afterward, it was gone. CPS confirmed it wasn't in his things. For a flicker of a second, Drusilla's face betrayed discomfort before the mask slid back on. They didn't just take property or custody, I continued. They erased pieces of his life. The judge nodded, making a note. When it was their turn, their attorney tried the same tired angle, painting me as emotionally volatile, echoing the false CPS report. "Ms. Brandt," the lawyer said, "would you describe yourself as someone who reacts strongly when challenged?" "I'd describe myself," I replied evenly, "as someone who reacts appropriately when her son is taken under false pretenses." Twice, the judge interrupted to redirect them back to relevant facts. Every calm answer I gave made their strategy look more desperate. In court, restraint is a blade sharper than rage. Finally, the judge summarized, "We have evidence of a forged property sale, financial misuse, documented CPS manipulation, and credible testimony of emotional harm." He looked directly at me. "I will be recommending full custody of Keaton to Mrs. Brandt, effective immediately. Additionally, I'm ordering a criminal investigation into the property transaction." The room stayed silent, but the sense of justice was almost physical. Drusilla's jaw clenched, her gaze dropping when the judge met her eyes. I exhaled slowly. The hardest battle was won, even if the war wasn't entirely over. As the court adjourned, Leora leaned toward me. "You just won the war. Now we secure the peace." I watched Drusilla and Taryn leave without a word, their defeat heavy on their shoulders. The fight for my son's future was almost over, but there was still one final door to close. The week after the court ruling felt like stepping out of a storm into a still, protected harbor. The house was quieter, but it wasn't the hollow kind of quiet I'd grown used to. It was a living, breathing peace. Mornings with Keaton were slow and unhurried. We'd sit at the table, him eating toast while sketching little comic strips in the margins of his homework, me sipping coffee without the tight knot of anxiety in my chest. On Tuesday, we walked to school together, the sun just breaking over the rooftops. He told me about a science project he wanted to start, his hands waving with excitement. That simple conversation was worth every sleepless night, every moment in court. Peace isn't the absence of trouble, I thought, watching him wave goodbye at the school gates. It's the presence of justice. The custody papers weren't in my hand yet, but they were coming, and the outcome was no longer in doubt. By Friday, I had my first public reminder that the no-contact order was more than words on paper. I was at the grocery store, halfway down the canned goods aisle, when I caught a glimpse of Drusilla at the far end. She looked smaller somehow, her usual upright posture just a little stooped. Before I could decide whether to leave or keep shopping, a uniformed officer stepped through the sliding doors. He walked past me without hesitation and stopped beside her. I couldn't hear every word, but no contact order carried clearly enough. Her face flushed deep red, the kind of color that climbs from your collar when you know you're being watched. People in the aisle froze mid-reach, the hum of the store falling away as the officer's voice stayed calm but firm. She nodded, murmured something, and turned to leave, her cart abandoned. I didn't feel triumph. There was no satisfaction in seeing her diminished. What I felt was finality. The door between us had closed, and I had no reason to open it again. Driving home, I found myself tracing the entire arc of the past months in my mind. The twisted ankle that had seemed like such a small setback, the help I thought I could accept, the hollow excuses, the CPS visits, the forged signature, the courtroom's echo when the judge handed down his ruling. The woman who had stepped into this mess months ago would have avoided confrontation, would have swallowed her discomfort for the sake of family harmony. That woman didn't survive what followed. In her place stood someone who could face them without flinching, who understood that blood ties don't excuse betrayal. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't your home, I remembered reading once. Sometimes you have to build it yourself. My real family was the one I came home to now, just me and Keaton, safe in a house that belonged to us in more than just name. Loose ends were tying themselves off. The restitution process for the fraudulent sale had begun. My attorney was optimistic we'd recover more than expected. CPS had sent written confirmation clearing my name, striking every false report from the record. Even the neighbors' looks had changed. No more cautious, sidelong glances, just a wave or a hello that didn't carry pity. Keaton was changing too. He slept through the night more often. He talked more at dinner, volunteered to set the table, and even brought home a school art project titled Our Home. The drawing showed a small red house under a bright sun, me and him in front, smiling. No one else. One evening, I took the thick evidence folder from its spot on the bookshelf. I paged through it one last time, not to relive the details, but to acknowledge them. Then I locked it away in my desk, not destroyed, but no longer in reach for daily life. There were things to rebuild, my savings, my routines, the space in my mind that had been occupied by defense strategies. Maybe someday we'd move to a different neighborhood, maybe even a different city. But for now, Spokane still felt like the right place to plant new roots. That night, after Keaton was asleep, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea. The house was silent in a way that felt earned. I looked at the photo of us from the lake trip, wind in our hair, both of us laughing. That was the kind of moment I wanted more of, and I finally had the space to make them happen. I turned off the lights and started up the stairs when my phone buzzed on the console table. The message was from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about something you don't know." I stood there, staring at the words, the quiet around me thick and still. I thought I'd close the door on all of it, but maybe one last shadow had followed me home. 2 weeks after the no-contact order had been enforced, I was starting to believe the war was truly over. Keaton was sleeping through the night, my work was back on track, and the quiet in our home felt earned. That's when the message came. "We need to talk." It's about something you don't know. No name, no context. Just that. For a long minute, I stared at the screen, the words pulling me out of the comfort I'd begun to trust. My first instinct was to delete it and move on. But instinct also told me information, no matter how unpleasant, was power. If this was bait, I was ready to turn it into a trap. I texted back a simple, when and where. The reply came fast. Saturday. Riverfront Park. I called Leora immediately. I'm meeting them, I said. But you'll be close. And I want every legal safety net in place. She didn't hesitate. I'll have recording equipment, and I'll make sure we're covered if they try anything. Saturday morning, the sky was a sharp blue, the air cool enough to make Keaton's cheeks pink as we walked toward the playground. I'd arranged for a friend from my book club to meet us there and keep an eye on him. Once I saw him laughing with her kids, I turned my attention to the meeting spot, a bench by the walking path, visible from all sides. Drusilla appeared, moving with a purpose I recognized from years of her coincidental encounters. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her eyes locked on Keaton, and she started toward the playground. I stepped into her path. You know you're not allowed to speak to him. Before she could answer, two uniformed officers crossed the grass. Leora was a few steps behind them, her phone still in her hand from making the call. Ma'am, one officer said to Drusilla, you're in violation of a no-contact order. You need to leave immediately, or we'll have to take further action. The scene froze for a beat. Parents nearby glanced over, some pulling their children closer, others just watching. Drusilla's face tightened, but she said nothing. She turned and walked back the way she'd come, her exit watched by more than a few curious eyes. I didn't say a word. The silence was louder. Letting the law speak for me was more powerful than any argument I could make. When she was gone, Leora joined me. That text? She said. It wasn't from her. She handed me a folder. A former family friend reached out. They've been sitting on this for months, afraid to get involved. Inside were bank transfer records. Funds from the sale of my house routed through an account belonging to Breck, not just Drusilla and Harlan, Breck, and by extension, Taryn. This means criminal fraud charges, Leora said, against both of them if the prosecutor sees it our way. The satisfaction wasn't loud or giddy. It was clean, precise. The custody fight had been about protecting Keaton. This was about holding every guilty hand to account. File it, I said. No loopholes, no delays. Monday morning, we walked into the prosecutor's office together. The clerk stamped the complaint, the sound final and solid. As I signed the last page, I thought, this isn't revenge. This is balance being restored. When we stepped back into the sunlight, the weight I'd been carrying for months felt noticeably lighter. That afternoon, Keaton and I made lunch together, grilled cheese and tomato soup, his choice. We worked on his science project, then planned a weekend hike. Sitting there with him, I realized how far we'd come from that day I left him at my parents' door, thinking he'd be safe. Sometimes winning means walking away and never looking back, I remembered reading. Before bed, I packed the last of the court and case files into a box and slid it into the back of my closet. Not gone, but no longer something I needed to reach for. That night, the house was still except for the low hum of the heater. Keaton was asleep, his hair messy against the pillow, his breathing even. I stepped outside with a mug of tea, the cold Spokane night stretching above me, stars sharp against the dark. They tried to take everything, my home, my son, my voice, I thought. Now, I have all three back. This time, the silence was mine, and it was exactly how I wanted it.